Hello, everyone. Last few seconds to take your seats. Please get in soon. Okay. And we've just hit 4 o'clock. Welcome back. We hope you have all had the opportunity to grab a coffee or a tea and are feeling energized for our last panel of the day. Please note, at the end of this session, we will be taking a short 10-minute break to change our stage setting for the official closing. You are invited not to leave the room at this time. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Michael Schloms, Head of Division, Human Rights, Disability Inclusion and Media, to lead us through the session of Shrinking Aid and Disability Inclusion. Please join me in welcoming Michael and the panel on stage.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome. Welcome everybody to this session. This session will deal with a very particular challenge. I would say the topic somewhat overshadows this civil society forum as well as the entire GDS, if we're honest, which is shrinking aid. As we all know, the landscape has changed considerably the last months and years. We are facing multiple crises, wars, economic crises. Even democracy is in a state of crisis. And I think for disability inclusion, this is a very particular challenge. The disability rights movement in recent years used to have one major demand, saying we want our fair share when it comes to development cooperation. Disability rights count as much as do gender rights, children and youth rights, LGBTI rights, indigenous rights. But we are overlooked, we are ignored. We want, so to say, a fair share, a piece of the cake. Now we see this cake is getting smaller and smaller. And this is probably a situation we have not foreseen a couple of years ago. So the question for this panel is, what does it mean for disability inclusion, this shrinking aid? Is there anything we can do? And let me say the purpose of this panel, in my view, is to use these 75 minutes that we have in order to get some positive messages, some optimism, some hope. I know that many people are frustrated and stop watching the news, stop listening to the news. And I think this is not our approach. We wouldn't be here, right? So I hope that the panelists, distinguished colleagues, will give us some optimistic answers and some reason to hope. It's an honor for me to moderate the session. It's an honor. It's also a relief because I'm the lucky one who asked the questions. I'm not the one who has to give the answers. I would like to present very briefly the panelists of this session. So we have, to my right, Dr. Ola Abulgaib, the director of the Global Disability Fund. We have next to her, Frederick Uko, who is the co-CEO of Action for Disability and Development International. Next to him, Jeleel Odoom, board member of the African Disability Forum. To my left, welcome to Celine Duta, the CEO at United Disabled Persons of Kenya. To her left, Mary Keogh, IDDC chair, and to her left, Jose Beira from IDA, the executive director of the International Disability Alliance. one of the 3 co-hosts of the GDS, and here organizer of this civil society forum. So let us start with the first round of questions, and I'm really keen on getting to hear from your experience. What are your remarks, recommendations, how to deal with this challenging situation? Let us start with Jeleel from ADF. As we know, OPDs should be at the center of development cooperation. They more than often are not. OPDs compared to other organizations often lack capacity, lack financial means. So one risk is, even if you manage to find a donor who supports you, how can you make sure that you still remain independent and are not driven by a donor agenda? Up to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So to prevent that situation of donor-driven approach that overshadows, OPD, priorities, I think one of the first things we need to be thinking about is enhancing OPD-led, agenda setting. In that regard, we are looking at, co-creating, the agenda. And so one of the first things, and looking at the recent cuts, one of the first things I'll suggest will be that, we first look at foreign policies. Can OPDs be involved in shaping foreign policies? Because I think that is a very crucial area that we need to be thinking about. Can we also look at making sure that donors are always involving OPDs in the agenda setting, co-creating programs together so that it doesn't feel like, at the end of the day, it is donor priorities rather than OPD, identified priorities. It will be critical for us to look at that. If you look at, in terms of multilaterals, bilateral, agencies, it will be also critical that they look at how they set, their various agendas. Now, when you look at, in terms of capacity, and capacity has been talked about, for marginalized, organizations for some time now, I think it will be very critical that we begin to build capacity, within the OPD system to make sure that at least in the areas of governance, in the areas of financial management, in the areas of advocacy, very small, OPDs or emerging, OPDs are able to build their capacity in these areas so that they can host, large size, grants. Looking at issues, of mentorship. So for instance, I think that you can see, the difference between capacities. I think it is time for, well-established, OPDs to begin to mentor, smaller, organizations so that we can grow together. We can build the capacities together so that we can be able to, do everything that everybody else is doing. When you move away from capacity, we want to look at, issues of shifting the power. At least you can see, from many stories, around, there is always, the donor power, versus, the OPD power. And always, the donor power is always, bigger. Is it possible that, we can also look at, situations where you see that a lot of donors work through intermediaries. And these intermediaries are generally, bigger OPDs, sometimes international organizations. I mean, it is time for us to look at equally national organizations, regional organizations, grassroots organizations, because if we are not careful, we will build the top and the down will suffer. It is very critical that we look at some of these things. It is also very important that we look at a very flexible, I would say, reporting mechanisms. Because some of these OPDs, do not have, sometimes the competencies, or sometimes even the reporting mechanisms are very complex in nature, and so it's quite difficult for some of these OPDs. If we want to build, the system such a way that we are all, able to do, similar things, we are all able to work at every level, then it's very important that we look at some of these issues. In terms of international cooperation, we've seen over and over again that, many organizations are looking, at very big organizations. And I think that it is time for us to also look at the underrepresented organizations, smaller organizations. And indeed, if you look at some of the funding cycles, you see that some of the underrepresented or smaller organizations are not considered, in the whole mechanism. I think it is very important that as early as, we begin funding cycles, let's begin to involve, some of these underrepresented smaller organizations in the whole process. It will be very important for us to do that. Then looking at, importantly, funding agencies, I think that, when you consider the nothing about us without us mantra or principles, it is crucial to look at a situation where some of these funding agencies actually hire persons with disabilities in their agency to help them shape funding priorities. Because, in the past, it just happens that funding agencies just say, this is our priority. It is time for us to really look at that. And I think that if we have persons already in the system who are driving these processes, who are being consulted to drive these processes, it will be very crucial. And I think that more and more there should be consultations with OPDs at every level, whether it is at the national, regional, or grassroots level. This will be very critical for us to make progress. I also think that, importantly, we need to look at issues of localization of development efforts. So, for instance, national and regional networks should also, get the needed support to be able to build local efforts. And I think that it is very important that we look at the dynamics of using, intermediaries, very big and large, organizations that are supporting these people. We need to begin to support some of these organizations directly. In terms of issues of flexible and sustainable funding models, I think it is time for us to look at the situation where OPDs, are constrained based on, short-term project-based, fundings. Let's begin to look at more, long-term, multi-years, support, for these organizations. That way, it is not donor-driven, because a lot of people get carried away with some of these small things, and for these reasons, they are not able to, focus on their own priorities, because the donor is dictating the pace. And I think it is time for us to look at some of these issues. Looking at issues of, accountability, I think that it is time for, us to prioritize participatory frameworks. A lot of times we've seen, donor, even when it comes to monitoring and evaluating even projects, it's based on the donor metrics. Can we look at what are the priorities of OPDs and what is it that they see as, impact based on their priorities? So everything, as I am explaining, should be donor, it should be OPD-led. We should begin to look more, into what is driving, the OPDs rather than looking at, the donor focus. I think that there are other issues of improved engagements where we are looking at making sure that indeed OPDs, especially those who are very much marginalized, who are underrepresented, build their capacity in some of these areas. And I think that if we are able to build their capacity in some of these things, we'll be able to make a lot more progress. I think by and large, the bottom line of the conversation is that everything should be OPD-led agenda setting. I think that we have a situation where, every now and then the agenda setting comes from donors. And indeed, if you look at especially the marginalized OPDs or underrepresented OPDs, sometimes these donors, do not even know what their priorities are, what they need. And indeed, the only way for us to be able to prioritize them properly is to engage, is to consult, and to make sure that we understand their specific needs. This is the only way, we can move forward. I thank you for, the question, and I hope that I have done justice to the question.
Thank you, Jeleel. So this is already an encouraging start, this demand for shifting power to OPDs.